In the late 1800s, a small team of explorers pushed into an uncharted Amazon tributary, expecting nothing more than dense forest and routine river travel. But the deeper they went, the quieter the world became. Birds vanished, the air turned cold. Then they found tracks far too large for any creature they knew. By the time they realized what kind of valley they were entering, it was already watching them. So before we continue, let us know where you are watching from. Thanks. I first heard of the valley from a trader in Bame, a man with a ruined ear and a habit of looking behind him when he spoke. He said there was a cut in the forest far upriver, where the ground rose like a wall and the air stayed cool, even at noon. He called it the Green Hollow. He would not say why he went there, only that he had seen tracks too large for any tamper and too deep for any buffalo. He drew them and spilled fina on the table. 3 long toes, a heel like a boat prow, and a mark at the rear that looked like a claw dragged in the mud. I was 27 then, working as a hired hand for an expedition led by Captain Alvaro da, a Portuguese officer sent inland to chart tributaries and locate stands of rubber for future harvesting. We were not a grand party, only 8 men with 2 canoes, a month off dried food, a small chest of trade goods, and a bundle of paper that the captain kept dry with more care than Hegov to his own skin. We had one local guide, a quiet man named Aja, who spoke Portuguese in short phrases and watched the water like it might rise and take him whole. He was from a village on Thelower Xingu and had joined us for a musket assault block, and the promise that we would not press beyond the places his elders called forbidden. Captain Alvaro was not cruel, but he carried his pride like a weapon. He had a narrow face, a clipped beard, and a way of talking to men as if he were granting them the use of air. Still he knew the river, and he paid on time. Beside him traveled Brother Tomas, a Dominican, who said he meant to visit scattered missions. He brought a worn Bible, a medical kit, and a steady voice that could turn rough men calm without tracing it. We had 2 rubber men from Santa Ram, Rui and Matias, both lean and loud, who laughed at fever until it came for them. There was Lo, a craffer with ink-stained hands and a cough that never left. There was Bento, a cook and boatman, who had spent half his life on water and claimed he could smell storms before they formed. And there was me, João Ferrer, clerk by trade, rifleman by nade, and the one tasked with keeping the daybook and counting supplies. We left at first light in the season when the river was beginning to drop. The banks were still soft, but sandbars showed their pale backs in the bends. The forest pressed close, thick with vines and broad leaves, and the air stayed wet enough to make every shore. We paddled in shifts, keeping to the center channel when we could, and pulling into shade at midday to let the worst heat pass. At night, we hauled the canoes onto a beach or a fallen tree, set hammocks between trunks, and built asmal fire that smoked more than it burned. The captain wanted speed, but he also knew that men who collapse on Thurver travel nowhere. For the first week, nothing rose in my mind except the usual parts of an Amazon journey. Mosquitoes, thick enough to make breathing hard at dusk. Ants that found any crumb you dropped within moments. A black caiman that drifted near us one evening, its eyes like wet stones in the firelight. We traded with 2 small villages. In one, the elder offered us smoked fish and warned Yorua quietly. I heard my name and the word hollow in their tongue. Yorua kept his face still, but later when we're alone, he said, "Old path, bad place, not for walking." Captain Alvaro asked him what he meant. Ayuan only shook his head. Grandfather say river, they're quiet, forest there, quiet, then loud. That was all. On the 9th day, we turned into a narrower tributary that the captain had marked from a map. The water there moved slow, and the trees leaned over it, turning the river into a long tunnel of shade. The birds were fewer. The sound of insects lowered, as if someone had shut a door. Bento said, the air felt wrong. He said it without laughter, and I watched him rub his arms as if chilled. We made better time in darkness because the shade spared us. Still, The river became harder to read. It split into side canals and dead ends. Twice we had to backtrack. Aja chose our way by signs I could not see. A certain bend, a drift of foam, a tree struck by lightning years ago. He never hesitated, yet his holders stayed tight. That afternoon, Lo called out from the stern of the lead canoe and pointed to the bank. At first, I saw only mud. Then I understood why his voice had thinned. There were prints along the edge where something had walked when the ground was still wet. They were not fresh, but they were clear. Each was longer than my forearm and deep enough that water pulled in the center, 3 toes wide apart, ending in rounded points. No claw marks like a jaguar, no drag like a man pulling a load. The stride between them was long, longer than any animal I knew. Rice stepped out to look closer, sank to his ankle, and cursed. He held his hands to the print as if to measure it. "That's from a man on stilts," he said, trying to grin. Nobody laughed. Brother Thomas crouched to examine the edges. "Not a tapper," he said. "Not a man." He looked up at Irwa. "Do your people know this animal?" "Stayed on the forest behind the tracks." "We do not hunt it," he said. Captain Alvaro straightened and brushed mud from his boot. "There are beasts here Nascalar has named. That is why we came." He sounded pleased the way he did when the river bent in his favor. "We keep moving." We camped early that night on a strip of raised ground. The trees there were taloned, had few low branches, which made it easier to hang hammocks. Still, the place felt exposed. No frogs called after sundown. The usual night chorus did not come. The river slid past without its normal chatter. I sat down pen twice, because the silence pressed on me like a hand. After we ate, Matias pulled his rosary and said a prayer for safe passage. We mocked him softly, but his voice carried no spirit. Lou sat with his map across his knees and did not draw. Bento kept going down to the river to look at the water, then coming back without speaking. The captain wrote in his own book by lantern light, lips moving as if tasting each word. Near midnight, I woke to a low sound from across the river, a dull call, as if a bull had tried to bellow with its throat full of water. I listened, holding my breath. It came again, farther this time, followed by a brief rush through brush. Then everything went still. I thought of manatees, of drowned log shifting, of anything that fit the world I knew. Still, my mouth stayed dry. In the morning, we found a tree on the edge of camp, pushed half over. The roots were torn from the earth. The bark was scored in long, uneven lines, as if something had raked it with a heavy limb. Captain Alvaro said a storm might have weakened it. Bento pointed at the sky, bright and clear. Nobody answered him. We pushed on. The tributary narrowed more, and in places the water became shallow enough to show pale stones under the brown surface. We had to step out and pull in a few stretches. The forest began to change. The undergrowth thinned and the ground rose in smooth slopes. We passed stands of trees that I did not know, their trunks straight and spaced apart like planted poles. The air cooled, not much, but enough to notice. Aya touched a necklace of seeds around his neck as we went, and his eyes flicked from Sedeto's side without rest. Before midday, we reached a stretch where the river widened into a still pool. The far bank was higher, a wall of green that rose steep and unbroken. The water here smelled different, metallic, and old. The captain gestured for us to pull in. "We are near the valley," he said. Yura waited not step out. He stayed in the canoe, hands on the gunwale. "Not valley," he said. "Mouth." Captain Alvaro frowned. "Mouth of what?" Urua shook his head once. His voice came out flat. "Biggin." No one spoke after that. We unloaded in silence, and even Rui did not joke. I remember thinking that the trader and Bam had looked behind him, because memory still followed him. I remember wishing I had asked more questions when I had the chance. We found a place where the bank could be climbed. The mud there was mixed with disturbed leaf litter, as if something heavy had come and gone more than once. The slope was not steep, but it rose for some distance, and the trees on it grew in ordered tiers. Roots crossed our way like ribs. We went up in single file, carrying what we needed for 2 days: rifles, food, a coil of rope, the captain's instruments, my notebook, and a bundle of canvas for shelter. Bento stayed with the canoes. He did not ask to come. He only said, "I will keep the boats ready." The captain chose who went without asking. Himself, of course. Because he wanted a record and an extra gun. Lou to mark the land. Rui and Matthias for muscle. Brother Tomas, Bakaza, insisted. "If you go somewhere men fear," he said, "it is better if someone prays on the way." That left only Aja. The captain looked at him and waited. For a long moment I thought the guide would refuse. His jaw clenched. Then Hess stepped onto the slope with the rest of us. "We walk fast," he said. "We do not sleep inside." As we climbed, the air changed. The usual smell of rot and damp lessened. There was a dry scent under it, like old stone. The forest grew quieter still. I had not thought there was more silence to be found, but here even the small rustles of lizards and falling seeds were fewer. Our boots made soft sounds in the leaf mold. I heard my own breath and the faint creak of pack. Far behind the river was only a dull murmur. We reached a kind of shelf where the ground leveled. Ahead, fell and dipped again, but gently, and the trees opened into a broad hollow. Sunlight reached the floor through gaps, yet the air held a dull half-light, as if the sky were farther away than it should be. Ferns covered the ground in waist-high waves, and here and there rose trunks stripped of branches for many spans, ending in crowns far above. In the center of the hollow stood a pool, round and still, its surface dark in spite of light. It was the sort of place that would have been called sacred in other lands. Here it felt held apart for a different reason. I stopped without meaning to. Walked into my back and the echo of his voice was wrong. It came back thin and crooked. "There," said the captain quietly. "This is worth the march." He stepped forward, but Lo caught his arm. "Look at the ground," the crafter said, his comfort gone. His voice had a strained clarity. "It is all tracks. Once I saw them, I could not stop seeing them." The ferns were trampled, where something had walked to the pool and away many times. The prints were like those we had seen on the riverbank, but more numerous. Some overlapped, some queued across each other. The earth was pressed deep, not only near the water, but along faint paths that circled the hollow and disappeared into the trees. Many murmured. Sweat ran down his face, though the air here was cooler than below. "Not one," Matthias spat on the ground, "so they come to drink. All beasts do. We take our notes and go." His words were bold, but he gripped his musket in both hands. Brother Tomas knelt, by one of the impressions, not close enough to step in it. He traced the edge without touching. "No one will believe this in Lisbon," he said. "They will say it is a trick, or that we lost our wits." "They will believe my maps," said Lo. "They always believe paper before voices." He looked around. "If alive to draw it." The captain turned to me. "Write exactly what you see," he said. "No more, no less. If we return, this will bring us backing for a full expedition, perhaps even a proper road." I opened my notebook with stiff fingers and began to record the dimensions and patterns as best I could. While I wrote, the thought crept in that we stood in the center of something we did not understand, marking it with our scratches, as if that gave us any claim. I pushed the thought aside. I had work. We moved along the edge of the hollow rather than crossing it. The captain wanted to see where the tracks went. They led away between two stone outcrops, half hidden by roots. Beyond that gap, the trees grew denser again, but the ground showed a steady line of disturbed earth, flattened plants, and snapped branches at the height of a man's chest. Something large passed here often, always along the same route. "It has a lair," said Rui, under his breath. "Everything that eats has a lair. looked back toward the way we had come. I realized he had been keeping count of how many steps lay between us and the river. "What do your people call this place?" asked Brother Tomas in a low tone as we walked. He spoke to Aja without. The guide hesitated. "Old mothers say there is a path in the forest where the ground remembers thy time before." He said, "They say sometimes it opens and sometimes it closes. When it opens, big ones walk. When it closes, big ones sleep and dream." "That is not a name," said the captain. "It is all they say," replied. "And these big ones," the priest pressed gently, "are they animals or spirits or something else?" Urua's eyes stayed on the ground. "If they are spirits, they leave heavy feet." We walked on. The path of damage led us gradually downward. The air grew cooler still, and beads of water formed on moss that clung to exposed stone. I felt a tightness in my chest that was not from the climb. It reminded me of being a child and wandering too far into, then realizing that every direction looked the same. I kept close to the others and checked the priming of me rifle more than once, though I knew it changed nothing. We found the first carcass near a low ridge. It lay half hidden under fronds, its body already swollen and souring. It had been a capybara once, a heavy one. Now half its torso was missing. The remaining hide hung in torn strips. Bones showed through broken flesh. The ribs that remained had been snapped, not cut or gnawed in the way I had seen jaguar kills. They were crushed inward. The spiny bent at an angle that made my own back hurt to look at it. Flies rose when we approached, a dull humming cloud. Tesmal hit us like heat. Matthias gagged and turned away. Rui covered his mouth with a sleeve. Brother Tomas crossed himself almost by reflex. "Jaw too wide," he murmured. "No cat does that. Do not touch it," said Lo. No one argued. He noted its placement and the erection of the drag marks that led from the path to the body. Whatever had killed it had pulled it there in one effort. The tracks around the carcass had blurred into a churned mess, but a few remained clear. One print overdeveloped the capybara's head. It dwarfed it. "We have seen enough," said Rui. "Bueno, something big eats here. The maps will show the hollow. We go back now." The captain's jaw set. "We have not seen it. If we are to convince anyone that this is worth more than a story to frighten children, we need more than dead animals and holes in the ground." He looked up ahead. "We go as far as the next rise. Then we will judge. Maps will not matter if men die," said Iu. It was the sharpest thing I had Hardim say. His voice did not rise, but there was a hard edge in it. "Big ones do not care about paper." I watched the captain weigh his pride against that warning. For a moment, I thought he might give in. Then he said, "We will keep to the trees. We will remain quiet. If there is danger, we turn at once. I will not go back to Bame with nothing but fishermen's tales." He moved on. The rest of us followed, because turning alone in that place felt worse than continuing with the group. My legs felt thievy. Each step forward felt like a small promise that I did not want to make. As we neared the rise, the light dimmed further, though the canopy had not thickened much. A bank of cloud must have crossed the sun, but we could not see the sky from where we were. The air cooled to a level that made my skin prickle. My breath came out in faint white puffs. That should not have been possible in that region at that time of year. No one spoke of it, but we all saw. Our bodies answered before our mouths did. Shoulders hunched, footfalls shortened. The sound came when we reached the top of the rise. It was not the distant call from the night before. It was closer, deeper, and carried a crack in it like green wood breaking. It came from ahead, and to our right, beyond a stand of tall trunks. A second later, there was a heavy impact, as if something large had shifted its weight against a tree. Leaves shook, a few full. We froze. The only movement was a thin ribbon of steam rising from my own lips. I did not dare to wipe it away. My heart beat so hard that it seemed louder than the noise we had just heard. "Stay low," whispered the captain. "No. Sudden moves. We see first." "We do not fire unless there is no other choice." His voice, usually sure, had roughness at the edges. He gestured, and we moved off the path into denser cover. Branches brushed our clothes. The ground there was spongy with old leaves. I felt each sound I made as a fault. We advanced in a slow arc toward the source of the noise. We reached the last line off trunks and stopped. Beyond them, the land fell away into another depression. There was a clearing at its center. Thefrons there were flattened in wide loops like the marks left by logs rolled again and again. At the far side of the clearing, half in shadow, something moved. At first it was only a shape behind foliage. Then it stepped forward. I had seen drawings in foreign books of creatures that no longer lived, found in stone far from the Amazon. This thing was like those pictures made plain and breathing. It stood on two powerful legs that ended in broad feet with 3 forward toes. Its body was thick and muscled, the skin a dull brown-green marked with darker patches. A long tail balanced behind it, swaying faintly. Its torso rose higher than a man. The head jutted forward on a thick neck with a snout full of conical teeth that showed when it opened its jaws part way. Two small eyes, dark and set forward, scanned the clearing. It exhaled once. The breath left its mouth in a visible rush in the chilled air. Its gaze passed across the ground, slow and deliberate, as if it searched for where it had last fed. The creature lowered its head toward a patch of disturbed earth near the center of the clearing. It sniffed, moved a step, and sniffed again. Each breath it released turned to faint vapor. I watched the steam drift upward bare, thinning into the air. My hands shook on the rifle. I forced myself to loosen my grip so the barrel would not rattle against the stock. Ree's mouth hung slightly open. I caught a glimpse of his lips trembling. He leaned until his shoulder touched mine, not because he meant to, but because his balance had gone weak. Matthias kept both hands locked around his musket with his elbows pressed tight to his sides. His face looked drained and his breath came shallow. Lou had hished tilted, studying the creature with the rigid focus of a man who wished he could draw without making noise. Evan brother Tomas had gone completely still. His fingers rested on the small wooden cross around his neck, not clutching it, only holding it, as if its familiar weight steadied him. The creature stopped over a patch of soil and pressed its snout into it. It pushed aside loose leaves with short, deliberate thrusts. A moment later, it exposed a half-eaten carcass. Not the capybara we had seen earlier, something smaller, perhaps a monkey. It had been torn apart and partially buried. The beast nudged the remains with its nose, then took hold with its jaws and lifted it easily. The bones cracked with a wet sound. The creature chewed twice, swallowed. Anton lifted its head again. It looked in a direction that made my stomach drop straight, toward the line of trees where Rue knelt. I felt the weight of that gaze as if a rope had tightened around my chest, but it did not focus. Its eye slid past us. It listened. A distant thud echoed faintly. I recognized it a second later, Bento shifting one of the canoes below. We were farther from the river than I had realized, yet the sound reached us. The creature turned its head more fully, facing the direction of the river. It let out a short grunt. Its tail stiffened. "Do not move," the captain whispered, barely shaping the words. Something in the clearing changed. The air, already cool, seemed to settle. The creature let the carcass drop. It took 2 steps toward the sound's direction. Its posture tightened. The way its weight shifted reminded me of hunting dogs when they caught a scent and prepared to run. But it did not run. It froze again, tasting the air with shallow breaths. Then a second sound came from our left, a faint crack of a branch underweight. Not from the creature. Something else in the trees near us. Urua stiffened before anyone else did. His head turned fractionally. His hand hovered near that knife at his belt. His eyes, which had been locked on the creature, narrowed slightly at the shape moving just beyond our sight. I heard a soft drag across, another drag, a muffled step, then silence. The creature in the clearing reacted instantly. It swung its head away from the river and toward the trees near us, the exact direction off that second noise. It made a low sound deeper than its earlier calls. Its muscles bunched, its tail lifted slightly off the ground. "Something else is here," I whispered, without meaning to. The captain shot me a glare, but did not contradict it. His face had gone pale. The creature stepped closer to our line of trees. The ground trembled faintly under its weight. I felt the vibration through my boots. It sniffed again, louder this time, drawing air through its nostrils with a rough pull. The smell of its breath drifted to us, dry, sour, and strange. There was no rot in it, no blood. It smelled like old stone and something mineral. Another sound came from the left, this time clearer. A movement through brush, slow but heavy. The creature leaned toward that direction, not toward us, toward whatever else moved out there. Matthias mouthed a single word, "More." I did not answer him. My throat felt tight. My thoughts came in broken pieces. It had never occurred to me that there could be more than one. But the tracks, the scale of them, the frequency of paths, they all pointed to more. A sudden shift in the foliage sent a shock through me. Leaves about 20 paces left of us shook. Something large pushed them aside, moving parallel to our hiding place. I couldn't see its shape, only the disturbance it caused. The forest seemed to bend around it. The creature in the clearing issued a rough sound, something between a warning and a challenge. It took a few steps toward the trees, placing itself between the noise and the carcass behind it. Its posture looked offensive. That alone unsettled me more than any direct threat could have. Whatever approached was not prey. The brush parted a little more. I glimpsed a bulk of dark gray-brown skin before it vanished again behind trunks. The movement was steady and slow, not creeping, not fleeing, advancing. Beg whispered, "Quiet, slow." The captain hesitated. Pride and fear wore across his. At last, he nodded once. We began to retreat inch by inch, keeping too low position. Each step felt like it carried the weight of a shout. My muscles cramped from holding tension. Ree's boot slipped on a patch of moss, and he caught himself on a root. The slight thump his hand made sounded enormous to me, though the creatures did not seem to notice. The creature in the clearing growled, a sound so deep it felt like pressure in my ribs. It took another step toward the approaching shape, then another. The two unseen forces in that space seemed aware of each other, but not yet in conflict. We moved back until the shapes in the clearing became faint through the trunks. We did not turn to run. None of us dared. We withdrew the way a man pulls his hand from fire. Slow enough not to draw attention, fast enough to escape the. Only when the clearing was fully out of sight did the captain gesture for quicker steps. We moved as one, stumbling down the path we had followed earlier, each of us watching every shadow. I checked behind us more times than I could count, expecting the ground to shake again. When we finally reached the slope above the river, the air warmed, the faint breath clouds stopped. The feverish tightness in my chest eased slightly. The normal forest sounds picked up again. The hum of insects, the distant call of birds, the wet thud of fruit falling far off. The world felt normal in ways that unsettled me more. I did not understand how such a place could exist so near this calm stretch of. We reached the bank and found Bento waiting at the canoes. He must have read our faces because he didn't ask what had happened. He only said, "We leave now." "Yes," the captain said. His voice wavered, only once. Bento shoved the boats into the water. We loaded fast. Too fast. Our hands shook. I dropped my notebook once and snatched it up from the mud. Nearly tipped a canoe when his foot slipped. Only when we're all seated and the river carried us away did anyone speak. Even then, it was quiet. "What did you see?" Bentofenly asked. His eyes stayed on the water ahead. He did not look back toward the hollow. "There are beasts in that valley," the captain said. "Two, at least two large enough to topple trees. They walk on two legs. They kill anything they find. They guard something there. We cannot return." That was the first time I had heard him say we could not do something. Yorua spoke next. "We leave this river," Hesed. "Not tomorrow. Now." The captain nodded. He did not argue. As the current took us around a bend, I looked back once. Only leaves and vines showed. The forest looked ordinary, the way it had for days before. I could not see the hollow or the tracks or the creatures, but I felt them behind the trees, walking paths older than our maps, older than any village. I told myself not to think of the noise from left, the one that had moved like it had no fear of the creature in the clearing. I told myself not to imagine how many might live in that valley, if two enormous shapes could cross paths without surprise. But I did think of it. Every time the trees shifted in the breeze, I saw the fern-lined hollow and the broken carcass. I saw the creature's breath condense in air that should never have been cold. We paddled hard until the river widened and the sun dipped. The captain ordered, "We continue even after dusk." He said, "We could sleep when we were leagues away, but sleep did not come easily for any of us. Not that night, not for many nights after." We did not speak much during the long push downstream. The river pulled us along faster than on the way in, and our paddles struck the water with quiet, steady movements. Everyone worked with a tense focus, as if pausing too long would let something catch up. I heard noticing steps, no splashes behind us. Still, the idea clung to my thoughts. Whenever I turned my head to glance upstream, I expected to see trees bending or water rising along the banks. The sky darkened fully, but the captain did not allow us to stop. Bento lit a small lantern and tied it to the bow, shielding most of its glow with a cloth so it would not blind us. The faint light just barely outlined the shapes of overhanging branches. Rui and Matthias sat stiff-backed in the lead canoe. Their usual restlessness was gone. Every time Ethal scraped a submerged branch, they flinched. Lufo's cough had not returned. He sat silently with his mupcase pressed against his chest like an object he feared losing more than anything else. "Brother." Tomas watched the banks. His hands rested on his knees, palms open as if calming himself. From time to time, his lips moved only faintly. He did not pray aloud. I think he didn't want to draw attention from anything that might still listen from the trees. Yorua remained in the stern of my canoe. He did not look behind us at all. He only looked ahead, scanning the twists of the river, as if each one might open into something worse. His expression had changed. The usual watchfulness in his eyes had turned into something harder, not fear, something closer to certainty, as if he had expected this possibility, and now saw proof of it. We pushed on until the sky gave only a thin band of stars above the canopy. My arms ached from paddling, but I didn't dare ask for a stop. The captain must have felt some exhaustion, because he finally allowed us to pull into a narrow bank where the trees grew close, but not thick enough to hide anything large. We hauled the canoes up quickly. "We stay together," he said. "No hammocks. We sleep on the ground by the boats. No fire." I had never seen the captain choose Togo without a fire. Even in storms, he insisted on some source of light. Tonight, he did not even consider it. We spread our blankets on a raised patch of soil. The ground was damp, but it felt safer than the dark line of forest that started only a few meters away. I lay down with my rifle across my chest. The others did the same. Only Brother Thomas kept his weapon at his side instead of holding it. He sat up for a long while, listening before lying back. Sleep. Kameen brief scraps. At one point, I woke to Rui, shifting beside me, breathing heavily, as if from a bad dream. Later, I heard Matthias muttering to himself. Once I sat up quickly, because something rustled near the tree line. but when he looked, I saw only falling leaves. Each sound seemed louder than it should be. It drifted in and out until the sky began to brighten. Thin gray light pulled across the river, and for the first time in hours, I felt my lungs loosen. The others woke silently. We did not talk about the night. We pushed the canoes back into the current and continued. By midday, we had reached the first village we had passed on the way upriver. Smoke arose from the longhouse hearths. A few children played by the water's edge. The place looked unchanged, but when the elders saw our faces, their expressions shifted. They exchanged glances among themselves. The oldest among them, a man with long streaks of white in his hair, approached as we pulled in. He studied each of us. His eyes lingered on Then and the captain, then on me. "You crossed the wrong place," he said in Portuguese. His voice was even, not accusing. He spoke as if reciting something that had been said many times before. "Not all woe, cross return." "We are leaving this river now," the captain replied. His tone was respectful, in a way I had not heard from him before. "We will not go that way again." The elder nodded. "That is good." His gaze shifted to the forest behind us. Old things wake when the door opens. They walk until the door closes again. "What door?" Matthias asked. The elder shook his head once. "The one between this time and another. The forest has many layers. Some are thin, some are thick. When a thin place steers, those who once lived here walk again until it heals." I said something like that, I murmured. The elder gave him a short look, but did not speak further. Instead, he gestured for us to come to the central longhouse. The captain thanked him, but declined. He only asked for water and dried fish fourth trip downstream. The villagers provided it without question. As we prepared to leave, the elder approached directly. He placed a hand on my shoulder. "Do not tell others where the hollow lies," he said. "Not all Williston. Some will return. They must not." "I won't," I said. The words felt heavy in my throat. His hand tightened briefly, then he stepped back. Once we were on the river again, the captain finally let us slow the pace. He sat straighter now, not relaxed, but more in control. Fear had not left him, but he had regained the part of himself that needed to plan, to lead, to decide what our journey meant. "We need to agree on what we bring back," he said. "Not lies, but not a story. That will send fools marching into that valley." Rui snorted quietly. "Who would return after what we saw? Men with money," the captain said. "Men with pride, men who want glory." Silence followed his words. We all understood the truth in them. As the afternoon continued, the river widened further. The trees thinned. We began to see the sky again. The oppressive sense of weight in the air faded. I heard more birds, normal calls, familiar rhythms. For the first time since entering the tributary, I believed we might actually leave that region behind. Later, while the others rested in a patch of shade, I walked a little way along the bank to clear my head. The forest here looked adorable. The ground was soft. The insects swarmed in noisy waves. Yet, everything I saw carried a shadow of memory. A broken branch made me think of crushed saplings in the hollow. A cluster of drag marks in the mud made me stop and examine them, even though they turned out to be nothing more than a turtle's track. I tried to place the valley in my mind, but it resisted being framed like normal geography. It felt like something out of joint, something that existed only under certain conditions and could vanish just as. That thought should have comforted me, but instead it troubled me. If it could vanish, could it also appear somewhere new? By sunset, we reached a wider bend, where the river met a larger channel. Bento steered the canoes toward the middle. The water there was deeper and calmer. As night fell, we set up camp on a broad sandbar. This time, the captain allowed a fire, a small one, enough to cook, but not enough to shed bright light far into the trees. We sat close around it. The warmth felt comforting in a way I had never appreciated before. Do you think there were more? Rui asked suddenly. His voice was low, but the question came out sharply, as if it had been waiting too long. Yes, said. He didn't look up from the fire. Many paths, many scents, more than two. Do they ever come out of that allow? Matthias asked. No, I replied. Not unless the door opens too wide. The captain looked at him. How wide was it when we entered? Udua thought for a moment. Too wide. Nobody spoke for a long while after that. We slept in shifts. The first watch was mine and Ree's. We sat facing the dark line offorest. I listened closely for any unusual sound. The night passed with nothing more than insects and frogs. At one point, a tapir splashed in the distance. The normally felt strange. Bidon, we were on the move again. The river carried us far from the tributary, and by midday, the air felt fully normal, warm, heavy, predictable. When we reached the last stretch before the main river, the captain finally let himself breathe deeply. He removed his hat and held it in his lap. We will deliver our maps and findings, he said, but not the path to that place. We'll say the area is too dangerous, looted, unstable ground, uncrossable terrain, enough to keep the curious away. That won't stop everyone, I said. No, the captain agreed, but it will stop many. As the sun dipped low, we saw smoke from a distant trading post. The sight brought relief. It marked the first sign of the world we knew. Beauty even then, even with the river broad and harmless, even with familiar landmarks returning. A small part of me kept listening for a distant crack of branches or a heavy step in the undergrowth. We reached the post at full dark. Lights glowed from the windows. Men laughed inside. The normality of it unsettled me almost as much as the hollow had. Everything looked unchanged, but we were not the same men who had left this river days earlier. We stayed the night inside the small hut given to travelers. While the others settled in, I sat near Theaterway, watching the river. At one point, when the fire inside had burned low and the night wind stirred the leaves, I thought I heard a distant call. Deep, throaty, barely audible, I told myself. It was only wind shifting down the channel, but I did not sleep for a long time afterward. When morning came, the world looked normal again. Birds called, men loaded goods, canoes moved along the water with the usual clatter of paddles. We joined the current that would take us back to Wardbay. I placed my notebook inside a sealed pouch and told myself I would write only the details that would not lead anyone back to that hollow. Yet, as we traveled, the memory of the creature standing over the carcass remained as clear as if it had been carved into my thoughts. Its breath, its posture, the shift of its weight, all of it stayed with me. And the other shape in the trees stayed with me, too. We did not speak of that second shape again, but it knew it had seen us. I knew it had waited, and something inside me feared that somewhere deep in that quiet valley, it still was. We continued downriver for several more days, passing villages, camps, and stretches of forest that felt increasingly familiar. Little by little, the fear that had followed us began to thin, not disappear, but loosen its grip. By the time we reached Thebroder waters, where the great river widened into an open plain, the others had begun to talk in quiet voices again. Not about the hollow, not about the creatures, only about mundane things, food, weather, the condition of the... Rui complained about his blistered hands. Matthias joked about the taste of the dried fish. Bento hummed a low tune as he steered us around a cluster of floating logs. Their voices sounded strained, but they were The captain, meanwhile, became more withdrawn. He studied the horizon, the riverbanks, the sky. I could see him turning the experience over in his mind, the way a man examines an old injury to see how deep it runs. He asked me, to recount details from my notes, not because he had forgotten, but because he wanted to check his memory against written fact. Each time I read aloud the measurements of the tracks, or the sequence of events, he nodded without expression. Once he said, "This will haunt scholars for years, if it ever reaches them." Then he fell silent again. We stopped at a small river's mission on the 6th day. The priest there, an older man with thin arms and a patient manner, welcomed us. He noticed something in our posture and asked if we needed confession or counsel. Brother Tomas thanked him but declined. That night, when the others slept, I watched from my hammock as the brother sat with the mission priest near the doorway. They spoke softly. I could not hear their words. I only saw the slow, measured movements of their hands and the stillness of their faces. When they finished, Brother Tomas returned to us without any sign of relief. We left the mission before sunrise. The sky was clear. Birds flew low over the water. The forest on either side looked unchanged since before our journey to the hollow. Yet each time a branch snapped or a shadow shifted, my heart tightened. None of us had returned to our previous selves entirely. On one of the quieter afternoons, while the others dozed or rested, I sat in the middle of the canoe writing. My intention was to record the sequence of our return journey, but my mind kept circling back to one question. Why had the air in the hollow been cold? The Criaturestums explained many things. The tracks, the torn carcasses, the silence of the forest. But the cold could not be explained by anything I understood about the region. Tropical valleys did not grow cold enough to release clouds of breath. I had spoken of layers of time-thin places in the forest. I had dismissed it at first, but the memory of the cold stayed with me, more strongly than any story could. I closed my notebook. I didn't want those thoughts written where someone might read them. Some ideas should stay in the mind. By the time we reached Bame, the season was shifting. The rains threatened again. The riverfront buzzed with merchants, shouting prices, crates being unloaded from boats, and the smell of tar and fish. Everything here felt rooted in the present world, real and solid. We tied the canoes at the same dock where we had departed. Men passed by without noticing us. For a brief moment, I looked at the crowds and wondered how many of them would ever believe what lived deep in the forest upriver. How many would laugh? How many would try to find it? As we unloaded our gear, the captain gathered us around. His voice was calm, controlled. "We write separate accounts," he said. "Mine for the ministry, yours for yourselves." But none of us named the location of the hollow. We frowned. "We're lying by omission. We're preventing a disaster," the captain replied. "If others go there with more men, more weapons, more ambition, they may not return, or worse, they may bring something back." That last part chilled him, not because I thought it was likely, but because it came from his mouth, a man who never fed superstition. We all agreed. Later that evening, after we had been paid and released to our homes, I walked alone through the streets. Lanterns burned along the port. The night air felt warm and familiar. I tried to anchor myself in the ordinary world, the taste of street-cooked nail, the chatter of sailors, the laughter of drunk traders, yet none of it washed away the memory of the hollow. I walked until I reached the edge of the city near a small chapel. I sat on the steps and listened to the distant river. It sounded gentle here, content even. First time since we fled the valley, I allowed myself to think of the moment when we had first seen the creature flee, the way its posture shifted when it sensed the other presence. Not frightened, alert, defensive, as if two giants moved in a place not meant for either one. That memory would not let me go. In the weeks that followed, the expedition dissolved. Rui and Matthias took another job upriver, far from the tributary we had explored. Bento stayed near Bame as a boatman. Lou was hospitalized for a fever and spent months recovering. The captain filed a trimmed-down report that mentioned unusual tracks, an unstable valley, and signs of predatory wildlife beyond expected size. Nothing more. Brother Tomas spent more time at the inn. He visited each of us once. He asked nothing about the valley. Instead, he asked how we slept, how often we felt unease, whether we had heard anything strange. His questions were careful. When I told him my sleep had been restless, but improving, he nodded with quiet relief. Aja left without a word. One morning, he was gone, and the villagers near the docks said he had taken a canoe east toward his home. I did not expect to see him again. Time moved on. The nights grew easier. The hollow faded from my immediate thoughts, though never entirely. Sometimes I woke from dreams where I saw the ferns flattening under unseen weight, or heard the deep grunt of the creature in the clearing, but the feelings softened. They became memories rather than months passed. Travelers came and went. New expeditions formed. Merchants told stories about strange things they had heard from far upriver. Echoes of rumors. Nothing more. None of them mentioned cold air or creatures walking upright. None mentioned a hollow. I returned to clerking for a river merchant. Ledger work, counting crates, organizing shipments. The routine steadied me. Life settled into its familiar rhythms. Then one evening, as the sun set red across the river, and I locked the warehouse for the night, something strange happened. It was small, barely worth noting. A breeze swept down from upriver. A cool breeze, cooler than its hold have been for that season. It brushed across my arms. Goose flesh rose instantly. Nobody around me reacted. Pathetic workers continued their tasks. The boatmen shouted for ropes. The city moved on, unaware. I stood still, listening. The breeze faded. The warmth returned. But for that one moment, the air had felt wrong. A memory came back sharply. The way our breath had clouded in the hollow. The unnatural chill that clung to our skin. I closed my eyes. When I opened them again, the river looked ordinary, calm, wide, harmless. I breathed slowly. Maybe the breeze meant nothing. Maybe it was just a draft from a passing storm upriver. That was what I told myself as I walked home. But it knew what I felt. The forest keeps its secrets. The hollow is far away. The creatures are farther still. Yet sometimes when the wind shifts in just the wrong way, I remember the other old things wake when the door opens. And I cannot help but wonder if the door ever fully closed. In the late years of the 19th century, when the maps of the Amazon still showed vast blank spaces and the old world kept imagining new monsters inside them, a small team of explorers moved along a nameless tributary, expecting nothing more than tangled forest, heat thick as syrup, and the usual hazards of river travel. But as the canoes slid deeper into that unmapped waterway, the world began to change in ways none of us could easily explain. First, the birds vanished. They did not gradually fade. They were simply gone. Then the air cooled, as if a hidden draft seeped from cracks in the earth. Even the insects thinned, and that was something no one traveling the Amazon ever expected to feel relief about. Joe Ferrer was 27 then, a clerk whose hands were made for ink more than rifles, but who had learned to use both. I joined Captain Alvaro da Costa's expedition for pay, and because the captain had a way of speaking that made you believe he would come back alive from any forest. No matter how monstrous, he was a Portuguese officer with a clipped beard and the permanent expression of a man evaluating the worth of everything he saw, including people. Still, he knew rivers the way sailors know stars, and that gave the men confidence. There were 8 of us. The captain, Brother Tomas, a Dominican with a quiet voice and steady hands, 2 rubber men from Ree and Matthias, loud as parrots until fear took them, the cartographer, Lobo, always coughing ink from his lungs, Bento, our cook and boatman, our guide Aja, from a distant Xingu village, and me, keeper of the daybook, before we ever reached that cursed tributary. I heard rumors of a place the locals called the Green Hollow. A trader, Impera told me, a man with one ruined ear who kept looking over his shoulder as if someone walked behind him at all times. He said the hollow was not merely a valley, but a wound in the forest, a place where the earth rose like a wall, and where the air stayed cool even when the sun scorched everything else. He claimed to have seen tracks 3 long toes, a heel shaped like a prow, and a drag mark behind them, as if a fourth claw scraped the mud. I laughed at the time, but the memory returned to me with sharp teeth when we found prints just like that along the riverbank later. We began our journey early in the season, when the river was starting to fall. The water was still swollen, but pale sandbars showed their backs like emerging bones. We paddled by shifts, rested in the worst heat, and slept in hammocks hung between trees that whispered all night with the movement of small creatures. For the first week, everything was ordinary. Mosquitoes thick enough to choke breath, ants that traveled in disciplined lines like soldiers, a black caiman drifting too close one evening, and the usual sounds, frogs, birds, laughter around the fire. 2 villages traded with us. In the first, the elder warned something to Aja. I heard only my name and the word hollow, spoken with the weight of old fear. When I asked the guide about it later, he said only, old path, bad place, not for walking. On the 9th morning, we entered the narrow tributary. From the first paddling stroke, we knew something was wrong. The forest pressed close, branches forming a tunnel overhead. The light dimmed, the water moved slow, as if thick. The usual chorus of life frogs, cicadas, monkeys fell quiet. Even Ree, who joked about fever and death the way some men talk about the weather, stopped making noise. By afternoon, we reached a bank where the mud held prints larger than any animal I had seen. 3 toes, deep impressions, long stride. The air felt colder beside them, as if whatever made those tracks carried its own weather. That night, silence wrapped around our camp like a shroud. I woke sometime after midnight to a low call from across the river, wet, muffled, as though something massive tried to cry out through a throat filled with water. A moment later, there was a rapid crashing through undergrowth, then silence again. Morning brought a broken tree, pushed halfway over, its roots torn from the earth. The bark had long, uneven gaps. The captain blamed wind. Bento pointed out the sky was clear enough to burn your eyes. By the next day, the river widened into a still, circular pool. The far bank rose sharply, green and unbroken, almost like a hidden ramp leading upward. The water smelled metallic, old, wrong. We are near the valley, the captain said. No valley, Aja whispered. Mouth. The others looked at him. Mouth of what? The captain asked. Aja did not answer. We climbed the bank with packs for 2 days. The forest changed as we ascended. Fewer vines, more straight, pale-barked trees, spaced like soldiers. The air cooled further. The slopes were smooth, almost unnaturally so. My unease grew with every step. Even the light felt different, thin, washed out, the color of old bone. Halfway up, I felt the sensation of being watched, not by something hiding behind a tree, but by something enormous, far above or far below, something waiting for us to take one more step. When we finally reached the top of the slope, the forest opened into a vast hollow-eyed green, silent, and there, at the far end of the valley, I saw movement, a shadow passing between trees that looked far too large for any natural creature. I felt my breath catch in my throat, because whatever lived in that forgotten place had noticed in the final years of the 19th century, when maps of the Amazon still carried more empty white patches than truth, a small expedition pushed into a quiet, unmapped tributary. None of us expected anything extraordinary. We were prepared for heavy forests, suffocating heat, and the usual misery that river travel demands. But the deeper we drifted into that forgotten artery of water, the more the world around us seemed to drop away. The first sign was the birds. One moment they filled the branches, and the next, the canopy felt deserted, as if something had peeled the life out of it. Then the heat loosened. A faint coolness crept along the water, so out of place in that climate that even Ree stopped joking. Insects thinned. Their noise faded. It felt as if the entire jungle was holding its breath. I was 27, then Joe Ferrer, clerk by trade, rifleman when necessary, and the one responsible for the daybook. I had joined Captain Alvaro da Costa for simple reasons: steady pay, and his uncanny ability to make men feel safe even when they were not. He was the sort of Portuguese officer who carried his pride like a lantern. You always noticed it even when he didn't raise it high. Our group was small. The captain, sharp-eyed and sharp-tongued brother Thomas, who could calm anyone without lifting his voice. Ree and Mati, rubbermen who laughed at everything until fear found them. Lobo, a cartographer whose ink-stained fingers shook when he coughed. Bento, our cook and silent boatman, our guide, Aj, from the lower Xingu, and myself. I had heard whispers of a place called the Green Hollow long before we reached it. A trader, in Para, a man with a mangled ear and a constant habit of glancing behind him, once described a rise in the forest where the air stayed cold at noon and the ground felt carved rather than grown. He sketched a track for me: 3 long toes, a boat-shaped heel, and a dragged mark behind it like a claw, tracing the mud. Back then, I dismissed it. But when we later found similar impressions pressed deep into the riverbank, I wished I had listened more closely. We traveled through the first week as anyone traveling the Amazon does. Baton stung, soaked, blistered. Mosquitoes swarmed thick enough to blur the air. Ants marched over everything. And one black caiman watched our fire from the shallows, its eyes reflecting the flames like 2 dull coins. 2 isolated villages traded with us. In one of them, the elder pulled Aja aside. I heard my name mixed with a word in their tongue that I recognized only faintly: hollow. When I pressed our guide later, he said only, "Old place. Not good. My elders forbid it." On the 9th day, we entered the narrow tributary the captain had marked on his maps. From the moment our paddles touched that dark water, the forest changed. Trees leaned inward, closing above us until we traveled inside a green corridor. Shadows covered the river, even at midday. The sound of the world thinned until it felt as though someone had muted it. In the afternoon, Lobo pointed toward the mud at the bank. At first I saw nothing unusual. Then the shape resolved, a track longer than my forearm, deep enough for water to pool inside it. 3 white toes, spaced like splayed fingers. No claws like a jaguar, no drag of a man, just clean, impossible impressions. Ree stepped into the mud, tried to joke that it belonged to a man on stilts, but no one laughed. Even he didn't, that night. The silence felt physical, like a cloth wrapped around the trees. I woke to a sound drifting from across the river, a muffled bellow, thick and wet, as though made by something with a throat full of water. Then, a burst of movement through undergrowth. Then nothing. Morning revealed a half-fallen tree near the edge of our camp. Its roots were torn upward. Long grooves ran down the bark, uneven and heavy as if something huge had pushed or dragged across it. The captain blamed wind. Bento stared at the cloudless sky and said nothing. By midday, the tributary spread into a still, circular pool. The opposite bank rose in a steep green wall that looked less like a natural hill and more like something hiding what lay behind it. The water had a strange metallic smell, old and sour. "We are close to the valley," the captain said. Aja did not move from the canoe. "No valley," he murmured. "Mouth. Mouth of what?" the captain asked. He did not answer. We climbed with packs prepared for 2 days' food: rifles, rope, the captain's instruments, my notebook, and canvas for shelter. Bento remained with the boats. He didn't ask to join. He simply said, "I will keep them ready," and looked at the water as though expecting it to rise. The higher we went, the stranger the terrain became. The forest changed character: fewer tangled vines, more tall, pale trunks spaced in unnaturally even intervals. The ground rose smoothly, almost carved. The air cooled enough that breath came easier. Halfway up, I felt a pressure behind my spine, like unseen eyes following each step. It wasn't the sensation of something hiding behind a tree. It felt deeper, older, like something waiting for us to cross an unseen boundary at the crest. The forest opened into a wide hollow, drenched in green. For a moment it looked peaceful, untouched. Then something moved at the far edge, something tall, massive, passing between trees with deliberate slowness. It didn't feel like we had discovered the valley. It felt like the valley had been waiting for us. And now that we had arrived, it finally lifted its head to look